Happy Monday, everyone. Just reviewing a little bit of notes on the Hebrews so we can start on Tuesday, really wrapping some things up and reviewing. So, review on Judaism, the monotheistic religion, the holy books, the Torah, the symbols of Star of David, and the place of worship is a synagogue. The father of the Jews is Abraham, who had many sons. Many sons had Father Abraham. And the Hebrew text says that God called him out of the land of Ur, and he went to the land of Canaan, where he was going to have as many descendants as the sands on the seashore, it says. And then you go through the lineage. Abraham begot Isaac. Isaac begot Jacob and Esau. But we have a special guest here. Do you remember what Esau sold his birthright for?
Some stew?
Very good. Better be some good stew. And so Jacob had 12 sons, one of those being Joseph. And Joseph was sold into slavery to
Egypt.
Good. And in Egypt, he rose to second in command, and he was interpreting dreams and such. And then there was a what in the land?
Famine.
Very good. And a famine caused the Hebrews to come down and say, we need food. And Joseph revealed himself to his brothers, and all the Hebrews were moved down to Egypt. Now, if you remember in Egyptian history, and I've said this many times, Joseph probably was second in command in Egypt during the Middle Kingdom, during the time of the Hyksos rule, where the Hyksos don't care who's second in command in Egypt. They didn't care if they were traditional Egyptians. So, when the New Kingdom starts, there comes a time where the Egyptians did not know Joseph. And they forced the Hebrews into You don't know.
I wasn't paying attention.
My wife wasn't paying attention, which I hope some of you aren't going to be like my wife and going to pay attention. And you're not watching something or paying attention to something else.
The wilderness?
No, not yet. The Egyptians forced the Hebrews into
The Red
they forced them into slavery.
Sea?
Goodness sakes, alive. It's pitiful. Forced them into slavery. Very good. And then, so, they wailed and moaned and cried until eventually a deliverer rose up. You know, the whole burning bush story, if you know that story. And his name was Moses. And Moses goes to Pharaoh and says, let my people go. And Pharaoh says, no. And then there's 12 plagues, like the frogs and the locusts and the lice and the boils and all the unpleasantness. And then the last one was the what? What was the last plague?
Not the river. That waterfront blood.
No, that was the first plague.
The
Goodness
baby started to
sakes.
die.
Yes, the death of the firstborn. And then the Hebrews had to put blood around their doorway so the death angel would pass over their house, which is why they celebrate Passover every year. Passover is the remembrance of this, and all the foods represent something that happened during the Exodus, which is the leaving of the Hebrews out of Egypt when Pharaoh says, get out. And then he changes his mind, he runs after them. The Hebrews get to the Red Sea, the waters part according to the Hebrew text, and there they go. And then the Egyptians try to follow, and kablooey, there goes the Red Sea, and they are no more. And eventually, Moses receives the basic law code of the Hebrews, called the Ten Commandments, on Mount, you know what mount it was?
Sinai.
Very good, Mount Sinai. And on Mount Sinai, he comes down with the Ten Commandments after being there a couple days, and the Hebrews are worshiping a golden calf, which is a big no-no in Judaism and in a lot of religions too. And so they are forced to wander in the wilderness, which is basically the desert, for 40 years. Joshua eventually takes over from Moses. They get into Canaan, You have a time period of judges in Israel until eventually you have the first king of Israel, which is
Saul.
very good. And Saul doesn't do a very good job following directions, which some of you probably don't either. So eventually you have the second king of Israel who rises up after being a hero in Israel after killing the giant Goliath, and that's King David. And King David is a man of war. He's always fighting and he's always conquering. And of course, David makes a lot of mistakes in his life, but he's also a pretty good dude. And David eventually has a son by the name of Solomon. Who was Solomon's mom? There, honey bunny. It was Bathsheba. Very good. So Solomon is known as the wisest and richest man that ever lived. I told you last week the story that the Torah or the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, talks about how that he was met in a dream, and God asked him if he could have one thing, what it would be. Instead of asking for riches and power, he asked for wisdom. And interesting story about Solomon. I haven't told y'all this one yet. How his wisdom is shown that two women came to him and they both claimed that this baby they had with them was their son. So Solomon said, what we're going to do is we're going to split the baby in half, and both of you can have half of the baby. I know it sounds barbaric. And one of the ladies says, no, I'd rather her have the baby than the baby to be harmed. And therefore he says, well, then you're the true mother, because only the true mother would want the baby not to be harmed. Very wise thing. You should have watched the video on Friday of the temple and what was in the temple. We're going to talk more about that on Tuesday and Wednesday. All right, new parts. So after Solomon dies, the nation of Israel is split into two parts because you have a series of kings, and most of them are bad kings, but nevertheless, you have Israel and Judah. Both of them are eventually going to be brought into captivity. I'm going to eventually you change your notes on Tuesday and or Wednesday on how Israel fell. But Israel falls to the Assyrians. Judah falls to the Babylonians. So we'll change that. And then you have something that's very important in Jewish history called the diaspora, the spreading of the Jewish people throughout all the world. And what's important about that is that they kept their culture with them. Okay? They kept the culture, their religion, their way of life as they moved into these new communities. They didn't adapt to other cultures. They kept their own. And that's why you had so many Jewish communities still around the world. Some Hebrew women in history. Like in a lot of societies, Hebrew women didn't have a whole lot of rights, but women played such a huge role in Hebrew history, and they're one of the few ancient groups that incorporate women in their history. For example, Miriam was the sister of Moses. Ruth, story of Ruth and Naomi is a big one. We're going to look at that more in person. Deborah, who was a judge of Israel. Esther, Queen Esther, who saved the Jews from annihilation. And then I think we ended up with what prophet means, which means mouthpiece of God. Can you name any prophets?
Jeremiah.
Good.
Nehemiah.
Good.
Samuel.
Samuel's good, yeah. A little hesitant on that one.
Elijah.
Yeah, good. All right, you're doing pretty good. Now we're going to get to the story of a group that really isn't in the necessarily in the Jewish holy book, but such an important family in Jewish history, and that's the Maccabees. The Maccabees were a Jewish family that led a rebellion in the land of Israel, and an independent Jewish nation was developed for about 100-year span, and they eventually are going to be conquered by the Romans. But the Jews were independent for about 100 years there, where they reclaimed Jerusalem, they reclaimed the land, and they built a second temple there in Jerusalem. Now, when the Romans come in and conquer the Jews, you have a group called the Zealots. who hold out against the Romans for quite a long time. They built a fortress on a mountain called Masada. Now, at Masada, this is Masada right here. This was on a mountain, and you can see here that they actually built like a fortress up there, and they held out there, and I don't know the exact number of years, but it was a pretty long time. And the Romans actually, over time, had to build a ramp out of dirt to get up there. And when they got there, they opened the door, and all the people in Masada were dead because they said that they would rather have died than be ruled by a foreign group again. And till this day, if you join the Israeli army, you take your oath at Masada, saying that Israel will never be again ruled by a foreign group. Pretty interesting stuff. So you can still go visit Masada today. We'll talk more about the review tomorrow. Now, let's talk a little bit about some Jewish holidays. Let's talk about Hanukkah. You probably have heard of Hanukkah before. Hanukkah it means literally the festival of lights, and it comes from the history of the Maccabees with the rededication of the Second Temple that was built. And the story is that they only had enough oil to rededicate this temple to last only one day, but the oil ended up lasting for 7 days and 7 nights, and so that's why they celebrate Hanukkah with 7 days and 7 nights, where they light a candle in remembrance of the Maccabees and the rededication of the Second Temple. That's why around the holidays you see menorahs. A menorah is a candlestick with 8 days. I'm sorry. 8 days, not 7 days. I apologize. I have to refresh my memory. I made a boo-boo. So the menorah is, you know what? I'm going to have to look that up. Goodness sakes. A brain fart. Might be 8 days. I'm going to have to look that up again. I apologize. So it's a celebration of the oil and the rededication, and they light a candle on the menorah every day for that, and they give gifts and presents to each other on Hanukkah. So it's a important holiday for the Jews. Other holidays for Jews would be the High Holy Days. They're called the High Holy Days because there are a couple of them. Yom Kippur, which means the Day of Atonement. Basically, it's the day where they are repenting of their sins for that whole year. And then Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year. And I don't remember what month Rosh Hashanah is in. I want to say September, but I'm not 100% sure. And then lastly, we sort of talked about this already. A rabbi is a Jewish teacher. A rabbi would be in some way sort of like what a preacher, minister, priest is to Christianity. A rabbi would be to Judaism, where they will sort of run the synagogue. There's going to be different types of rabbis. There's going to be the one you see here on the left with the curl in this hair. Those are Orthodox rabbis, very strict in the Hebrew law. And then you have the to the right, that's going to be more a a more liberal rabbi. Still very strict, but not as strict as the Orthodox. So let me look that up there for you for Hanukkah. I'll let you know on Tuesday. Sorry about the brain fart, but it happens. But let me know if there's anything to do for you. I should finish your notes up. Next week is going to be a lot of review, and then we'll prepare for a quiz at the end of next week. So happy Monday, and I look forward to seeing some of you on Tuesday and Wednesday.